39 and holding, Jack Benny, the lovable skinflint of the airwaves. An increasingly flustered Benjamin Kobylski poured his best efforts into his violin performance. He could see, though, that the attention of the little group of soldiers was not exactly riveted on the instrument. As he pulled the bow across his violin, not only did he witness a sea of vacant expressions, he was sure he also heard the low rumbling of a mounting chorus of boos. Like the other young men, with the advent of World War I, Benjamin had joined the armed services. Because of some vaudeville experience, he was often chosen to entertain his fellow servicemen during his stretch in Waukegan's Great Lakes Naval Station. This particular day, though, his little audience simply wasn't in the mood for violin music. Noting Benjamin's predicament, one of his friends walked on stage and whispered to him, "For heaven's sake, Ben, put the damn fiddle down and talk to 'em." Drawing on some jokes he had recently heard, as well as his ingrained ability to ad-lib, he put down his violin and saved the show with humor. From then on, Benjamin, later using his new name of Jack Benny, utilized the violin merely to add flavor to his comedic skills. Those skills would eventually fly through the air on a radio signal that turned 7 o'clock Sunday evening into sacred time. Political discussions, chit-chat with relatives, or arguments about sports teams could wait. It was time for Benny. In fact, when Jack Benny finally signed off the airwaves, he left behind a void. For over 3 decades, that void had been filled by a lovable skinflint who never aged beyond 39 and who could deliver a line with possibly the best comedic timing ever known. Jack Benny's comedy style seemed effortless, but was actually developed through years of practice. Like many entertainers of his generation, his roots were nourished in vaudeville. The violin, although it later became famous for being tortured by Benny's squawking renditions of various songs, furnished his opening into show business. When 6-year-old Benjamin Kobylski plunked down the 50 cents his mother had given him for Professor Harlow's violin lessons, he had no clue he was putting a down payment on a world-renowned future. Although he would never become a master at the instrument, he was actually quite proficient. In fact, his parents hoped he would one day make a living as a professional violinist. That, however, was not his destiny. He loved the instrument, but like many youngsters, hated to practice. But he did learn to play well enough to perform in local Chicago vaudeville theaters for $7.50 a week. In 1912, when he was 18, he teamed up with a piano player named Cora Salisbury, billing their act as Salisbury and Kobylski, from grand opera to ragtime. This period would also prompt his name change. Popular violinist Jan Kabelek claimed that Benjamin's similar last name infringed upon his name recognition. In response, Benjamin adopted the catchy name of Ben K. Benny, changing the act's name to Salisbury and Benny. A little while later, he would be pushed to change his first name as well. Soloing as Ben K. Benny Fiddle Phonology, he was contacted by an irritated violin-playing performer named Ben Benny, who felt he was infringing on his name. According to Benny, he was dining with a friend, discussing the need for a new first name, when 2 former sailors walked by and greeted him as Jack. In the sailor slang of the day, Jack was often used like bud or fella for a man you didn't know. They inadvertently gave birth to one of the most famous names in entertainment history. Over the years ahead, the name of Jack Benny steadily crept higher on the vaudeville marquee, and into the show business weeklies. During these vaudeville days, more than good reviews and an increased salary caught his attention. While he was playing the Orpheum Theater in Los Angeles, he was introduced to a fellow vaudevillian's younger sister-in-law, Sadie Marks. Instantly smitten, Jack learned she was working at the hosiery counter at the May Company near the theater. Over the next few weeks, he often dropped by to chat, usually buying hosiery to provide a reason for his visits. Eventually, he bought so much hosiery, he helped her set a company sales record. They were married in 1927, and Sadie began to take part in some of his vaudeville bits. When he moved to radio in 1932, he gave her a call at home when a scheduled actress hadn't arrived for the show. The actress had been scheduled to play a character named Mary Livingston. Thinking his wife could play the part, Jack arranged for her to join him at the radio studio, and she handled the brief role like a champ. It was originally slotted for only 2 episodes, but NBC received so much fan mail, she was soon made a regular on the show. Eventually, in fact, Sadie officially changed her name to Mary Livingston. In a similar manner, radio actor Eddie Anderson turned a one-time bit part into a lifetime career. He played a train porter named Rochester on a 1937 episode and, like Sadie, prompted a flood of positive listener reaction. On a later program, Jack would hire him away from the railroad to become his butler. Through the years, Anderson provided some of the biggest laughs on the show, often at Benny's expense. In fact, Mary, Rochester, Dennis Day, Don Wilson, Mel Blanc, and the rest of Jack's wacky companions would often have lines as funny or funnier than his. Benny understood the value of creating a comedy team. As long as the show is funny, he explained, it doesn't matter who tells the jokes. One of the most memorable of those jokes originated in March of 1948. 2 of Benny's staff writers were playing to his notorious on-air stinginess. A mugger, they decided, should accost him on a lonely street, demanding, "Your money or your life." Then, after a long pause, he would repeat, "Look, Bud, I said your money or your life." One of the writers, John Tackaberry, began pacing up and down, trying to concoct Jack's perfect response. The other writer eventually became anxious and grumbled, "For God's sakes, Tack, say something." In defense of his extended concentration time, Tackaberry responded with a line that would become Benny the Tightwad's classic answer to the impatient crook. "I'm thinking it over." Radio's most famous inter-program feud was set in motion in December of 1936 on fellow radio comedian Fred Allen's program. A young violinist named Stuart Cannon had just given a standout performance of a Schubert melody on Allen's program. "A little fella in the 5th grade," Allen quipped, "and already he plays better than Jack Benny." This began a comic squabble that lasted nearly 20 years. As most radio listeners realized, the 2 actually were best friends and genuinely admired each other's talents. "You couldn't have such a long-running and successful feud as we did," Benny once said, "without having a deep and sincere friendship at the heart of it." When the show moved to television in the 1950s, viewers were delighted to see the wide variety of deadpan facial expressions and gestures that accompanied Jack's comedy. Visions of the show, whether produced by his hilarious television mannerisms or by Mel Blanc's wide-ranging radio sound effects, engraved indelible images in the minds of the Jack Benny Show's multitude of fans. When Jack finally left us at the age of 80, he reminded the world that his heart was as big as his talent. He arranged for his beloved Mary Livingston to receive every day for the rest of her life a solitary red rose